There's a moment where something subtle begins to feel off, not wrong, not disturbing, just slightly misaligned. You are in a conversation, listening, responding, following the flow as you always have. The exchange is smooth. The reactions are appropriate. Everything appears normal. And yet, something about it feels predictable. Not because you've had this exact conversation before, but because it follows a pattern you recognize. You may notice it in the way someone speaks. The tone fits perfectly. The expressions match the situation. The response arrives at exactly the expected moment. And instead of feeling natural, it starts to feel structured, almost like a sequence that has been repeated many times. At first, you don't question it. You simply notice it. But then it happens again, in a different conversation, with a different person. The same kind of response, the same emotional rhythm, the same pattern unfolding in a slightly different form. And that is when the shift begins. You're no longer only listening to what is being said. You are noticing how it is being said. And more importantly, why. You start to sense that people are not only expressing themselves, they are presenting something, maintaining something, a certain version of who they are. And once this becomes visible, it changes how you experience interactions. You begin to see layers, not just the words, but the structure behind them, the adjustments in tone, the way someone slightly shifts their behavior depending on who they are speaking to, the subtle control in how emotions are expressed, what is revealed, and what is carefully left out. This awareness does not arrive all at once. It builds gradually, through repetition, through the same patterns appearing in different forms, until it becomes difficult to ignore. You may find yourself in a conversation and suddenly realize you already know how this will unfold, not because you are predicting consciously, but because you recognize the structure, the role being played. And once you see the role, the interaction changes. You are no longer fully immersed in it. You are observing it, watching how the other person maintains a certain image. And at the same time, you start noticing something else. Your own role, the way you respond, the adjustments you make, the version of yourself that appears in that situation. And this is where the experience becomes more complex, because it is not only about seeing others differently. It is about seeing yourself within the same dynamic. You may notice that you also shift. Your tone changes. Your expressions adapt. Your responses align with what is expected in that moment. And for the first time, you see it happening, not as something you choose deliberately, but as something that unfolds automatically. This creates a strange kind of awareness. You are inside the interaction and outside of it at the same time, participating, but also observing. And this dual perception changes everything. Conversations that once felt engaging may now feel layered, less immediate, less immersive, because part of you is no longer fully inside the experience. It is watching the structure of the interaction itself. You may begin to feel a certain distance, not from people, but from the dynamic, as if you are no longer completely absorbed in what is happening. And this can feel unsettling at first, because it removes a certain kind of simplicity. Before, interactions were direct. Now they're observed, analyzed in real time, seen from multiple angles. You may start asking yourself questions you never considered before. Is this genuine? Is this how they really feel? Or is this part of the role they are maintaining? And these questions do not always have clear answers, because the role is not necessarily false. It is functional. It allows people to navigate social situations, to communicate effectively, to maintain relationships. But at the same time, it is not the full picture. And once you recognize that, something changes. You're no longer only interacting with the person. You are interacting with the role they are presenting. And that awareness creates a shift, not necessarily in how you act, but in how you experience what is happening. You may find that certain interactions feel less meaningful, not because they are empty, but because they are structured in a way that now feels visible. You see the pattern behind them, and that pattern reduces the sense of spontaneity. At the same time, you may become more sensitive to moments where the structure breaks, where someone says something unexpected, where the tone shifts in a way that feels less controlled, where the role slips, even briefly. And those moments stand out because they feel different, less rehearsed, less predictable, more real. And that contrast becomes important because it highlights something you are beginning to recognize. Most interactions are not entirely spontaneous. They are shaped, guided, maintained, and now you can see it, not occasionally, but consistently. And once you see it consistently, you cannot unsee it. What you are beginning to notice has a very specific place in Jungian psychology. It is not simply that people are acting. It is that they are operating through a structure that was never meant to be fully visible. Carl Jung called this structure the persona, not as something false in a superficial sense, but as a necessary psychological function. The persona is the form your psyche takes in order to meet the world. It is how you become understandable to others, how you adapt to expectations, how you maintain a coherent presence in social reality. Without it, interaction would be chaotic. There would be no consistency, no shared language of behavior, no stable way to relate. So the persona is not a problem in itself. It is essential, but it has a limitation. It is selective. It does not express the totality of who someone is. It expresses what is acceptable, what is expected, what is functional within a given context, and everything outside of that selection remains in the background. Jung was very clear about this. The persona is not the self. It is a surface, a necessary surface, but still a surface. At earlier stages, this distinction is not felt. You experience a persona as identity. The way you act feels like who you are. The way others act feels like who they are. There is no separation, no reason to question it. But as awareness deepens, that separation begins to appear. You start to notice that behavior is not entirely spontaneous. It is adjusted, calibrated, maintained. And this is what you're seeing now, not the person in their entirety, but the structure they're using to interact. This is why interactions begin to feel patterned, because the persona operates through repetition. It relies on known responses, familiar expressions, established ways of behaving that have been reinforced over time. When someone enters a social situation, they do not create themselves from nothing. They step into a role that has already been shaped, and that role responds according to what has been learned. This is why you can recognize patterns across different people, not because they are identical, but because the structure is similar. The way someone speaks in a professional setting, the way they present themselves in a group, the way they regulate emotion depending on context, all of this follows certain rules, often unspoken, but consistently applied. And once you become aware of these rules, you begin to see the persona in action. You see how someone adjusts their tone when speaking to authority, how their posture changes depending on the situation, how certain opinions are expressed more cautiously, while others are emphasized. This is not necessarily deception. It is adaptation. The psyche aligning itself with the environment. But Jung also pointed to something important. The more someone identifies with their persona, the more rigid it becomes. The less space there is for spontaneity. The less room there is for what does not fit the role. And this is where the sense of performance becomes more noticeable. Because when the persona is strongly identified with, it is maintained continuously. It does not relax easily. It does not allow for contradiction. It stays consistent, even when the situation changes. This consistency creates predictability, and that predictability is what you are starting to perceive. You are seeing the structure rather than the spontaneity, the pattern rather than the moment. At the same time, something else becomes visible, the gap between persona and what lies beneath it. Jung described this as a relationship between the persona and the shadow. The shadow contains everything that is not included in the persona, traits that are not expressed, emotions that are not shown, aspects of the personality that do not fit the role. And when the persona is dominant, the shadow remains hidden, but not inactive. It still influences behavior. It still shapes reactions, often in indirect ways. This is why certain moments feel different. When the persona slips slightly, when something unexpected is said, when an emotion appears that does not fit the situation, those moments feel more real because they are less structured, less controlled, less filtered, and you are beginning to notice those moments more clearly. Because your attention has shifted. You're no longer only receiving what is presented. You are observing how it is constructed, and this changes your entire perception. You see that what appears as personality is often a configuration, a combination of learned behaviors and adaptations. And while this configuration is functional, it is not complete. This is why interactions begin to feel different, not because people have changed, but because your perception has. You are no longer fully inside the illusion of the persona. You can see it, and once you see it, the experience cannot return to its previous simplicity. There's always a layer of awareness, a recognition that what you are interacting with is not only the person, but the structure they're using to present themselves. Jung did not see this as a problem to fix. He saw it as a necessary step, because recognizing persona is what allows you to move beyond identifying with it, not only in others, but in yourself. And that is where the process becomes deeper, because the same structure you see in others exists within you. There is a phase where this awareness can feel isolating, not because you are disconnected from others, but because you no longer experience interactions in the same way. You see the structure, you recognize the role, and that makes it harder to fully return to the simplicity you once had. Conversations that used to feel engaging may now feel predictable. Reactions that once felt meaningful may now feel patterned. And this can create a subtle distance, not from people themselves, but from the dynamic that used to define your connection with them. At first, this distance can feel like a loss, as if something important has disappeared. The ease, the immersion, the sense of being fully inside the interaction without questioning it. But if you stay with it, something else begins to emerge. Not immediately, not all at once, but gradually. You begin to notice that the awareness you developed does not have to separate you from others. It can change how you relate to them. Because once you see the role, you are no longer compelled to respond only to it. You have a choice, not always obvious, not always easy, but present. Instead of engaging with the surface alone, you can begin to engage with what is underneath it, not by forcing depth, not by confronting directly, but by paying attention differently. You listen beyond the words. You notice the tone, the hesitation, the moments where something feels less controlled. And those moments become points of connection, not because they are intense, but because they are less structured, more spontaneous, more real. You may also notice a shift in how you respond. Before, your reactions were shaped by the role you were playing. Now, there is space to respond more directly, not perfectly, not without adaptation, but with more awareness of what you are expressing. You are no longer trying to maintain an image in the same way. You are less concerned with fitting a specific expectation, and this changes your presence. You may speak more slowly, pause more often, allow moments of silence instead of filling them automatically. And while this can feel unfamiliar, it creates something different, a kind of openness. You are no longer performing in the same way, and that invites a different response from others. Sometimes they remain within their role. The interaction continues as before. But other times, something shifts, the structure softens, the tone changes, the response becomes less predictable. And in those moments, the interaction feels different, not because it is more intense, but because it is less controlled. This is where a new form of connection begins to appear, not based on mutual roles, but on mutual presence. It does not happen constantly. It cannot be forced, but it becomes recognizable. And once you experience it, it changes what you look for. You are less interested in interactions that follow predictable patterns, less engaged in dynamics that rely entirely on performance, more attentive to moments where something genuine appears, even briefly. This also changes how you relate to your own persona. You do not eliminate it. You still adapt. You still adjust your behavior, depending on the situation. But the difference is fundamental. You are aware of it. You use it when necessary, but you are not defined by it. This creates flexibility. The persona becomes a tool rather than an identity. You can move within it and step outside of it, depending on what the situation requires. And this reduces the sense of being trapped in a role. You are no longer maintaining a fixed version of yourself. You are responding, adapting consciously, allowing more variation in how you express yourself. This is what Jung described as a more integrated relationship between the ego and the persona. The ego is no longer fully identified with the role. It observes it, uses it, but remains aware of what lies beyond it. And this awareness allows for something more authentic to emerge, not as a fixed identity, but as a presence that is less constructed, less dependent on external expectations, more connected to what you actually experience in the moment. Over time, this changes how you experience social life entirely. You are still part of it, still interacting, still engaging, but the quality of that engagement is different, less automatic, less patterned, more attentive, more selective. You no longer seek to lose yourself in interactions. You remain present within them, and that presence creates a different kind of connection, not based on intensity, but on clarity, not based on performance, but on awareness, and that, while quieter, is far more stable. There's a point where this shift becomes permanent, not because everything changes around you, but because your way of seeing has changed. You can still have the same conversations. You can still move through the same environments. You can still interact with the same people. But something is different. You notice the structure, the patterns, the roles that are being maintained in real time. And once you see that clearly enough, you cannot return to not seeing it. Carl Jung understood this as a movement toward consciousness, not the kind that separates you from life, but the kind that reveals how life is actually being lived. You begin to recognize that most interactions are not purely spontaneous. They are shaped, adjusted, maintained through persona. And that realization can feel unsettling at first, because it removes a certain kind of simplicity, the sense that everything is exactly as it appears. But at the same time, it introduces something else. Clarity. You are no longer reacting only to what is presented. You are aware of how it is being presented. And that awareness changes your position. You are no longer fully inside the role. Not yours, not theirs. You are observing it, participating in it when necessary, but not completely identified with it. And this creates a different kind of freedom. Not the freedom to escape social interaction, but the freedom to engage without being absorbed. You can see the pattern without needing to follow it completely. You can recognize the role without becoming it. And over time, this becomes natural, not something you force, not something you think about constantly, but a way of being that allows you to move through interactions with more awareness, more presence, less automatic adaptation. Before we close, take a moment to reflect on something simple. Think about your last conversation, not what was said, but how it unfolded. Was it spontaneous, or did it follow a pattern you've seen before? And more importantly, did you notice your own role within it? That awareness is where the shift is happening, not in changing everything immediately, but in seeing clearly what is already there. If this resonates, write in the comments one moment where you notice someone or yourself acting through a role, not to judge it, just to recognize it. And if you know someone who has started to feel this strange distance in conversations without understanding why, share this video with them. Because sometimes what feels like disconnection is actually the beginning of seeing more clearly.